It was a bright and blustery morning at the start of winter in the realms. I was well overdue to leave my tower and retreat to the High-Hand Spire near Mintarn Island, which didn't get completely coated with ice from the gales of frigid temperature freezing the very sea froth against the ancient stone of Candlekeep would bring. My pseudo-dragon friend Macrotaxel was getting a little feisty with me. As far as he was concerned, I was overstaying in his lair. My chambers were sealed off, but he had his access via a chimney into my study room and kept the rats and other vermin from devouring all my books and keepsakes while I was away. He also, occasionally, had a nest, some youngsters, and I lost some treasured leather-bound tomes to little teeth and claws as the hatchlings got a little more mobile before leaving the lair at the start of summer. This was how I got to be friends with Macrotaxel after all, a few decades ago. Dragons were the order of business on that morning though. I was outside the keep, crouched and out of the wind behind a boulder, watching two rams smacking their curled horns together in the long, tough grass as the little wild herd of sheep watched on. They didn't stir until the last minute, then suddenly they caught sight of whom I was waiting for and scattered in terror, sprinting everywhere before gathering and charging off down the coast towards the still rising sun. My friend Olidmardramo, who many call Feather, roared at them, and this sound transformed very strangely into a braying donkey sound and then into the hearty bellowing laugh of a portly Sembian merchant. I stood up immediately to catch a look at her true form, but alas, I'd missed it, and the look on my face must have spoken volumes as Feather spread his hands and shook his head. "Oh, sorry, old Rune. I know you like to see me in the nude, but I don't want your little hermits firing a spell off me or one of those nasty big ship crossbows. Yes, I know what they're called, don't correct me." I gave the merchant a hug and stepped back and offered a respectful bow. "How are you, Olidmardramo? How's the kids?" The humanoid form she was wearing snorted and rolled his eyes. "Oh, who knows? I haven't spoken to any but Maimarin in the last 10 years, and that was a letter from the far east." "Kara-tur? Really? I didn't think that place was very hospitable to dragons." "Oh, you thought that, did you? Well, something I can educate you on for a change. Old sage. Come on, let's go inside. You're starting to make me feel cold with your bare feet." "Oh, yes, sorry. I put a pot of that broth on, you like." "With the rock crabs? And the onions? Oh, yes, after you." A few minutes later, and I was walking through the perimeter gardens toward the rear wall and the towers, and the dragon huffed in distaste beside me. "Don't they ever decorate around here? A few statues, a fountain or two, some decorative tiles, even shape some of those shrubs into topiary forms, more pleasing to the eye." "Well, those are rare medicinal and alchemical plants, Feather. We don't just hack them into shapes to make them look nice. They have better uses." "There is no better use for a plant, Sage." "As you say, but I think the botanists might not agree." Then I will eat them." "No, you won't." "I could, you know. Think of the mess." "Oh, quite right. It would be dreadful." When we did get to my chambers, Macrotaxel, along with all the pseudo-dragons along the western seawall, had vanished. "Make yourself at home, my dear Feather." The merchant looked around, eyes fixing on one item after another, all lining my shelves and resting against furnishings in wall space. He let out a low whistle as he peered closely at a little chunk of meat with a dry old eyeball in it. "What is this?" "As part of a domesticated beholder from Deep Amaska." He turned and stared at me for several moments. "Where?" I shook my head. It's much too dangerous a location to reveal. "Sorry, Feather. I barely escaped and lost a few years of my life just doing that." "And that's the first time you've ever denied me the answer to a question, Sage. So I'll take that warning quite seriously." "Good. Anyway, you said you had to see me. What about?" "Murgom, the Dragon Princess." "Ah, good. I've been wanting to hear more. All I've heard is rumours this far west of the Sea of Seros." "Well, we have a lot to talk about, as always." And with that, he closed the chamber door and grabbed a large bowl of crab soup. Electrum dragons are few in number. They are a distinct lineage of the metallic dragons and lost a large number of their population tens of thousands of years ago. during the Great Religious Wars which ripped the draconic civilization on Toril apart, at the same time that they were in a genocidal war with the giants. This is the reason you don't see a lot of the gem dragons or the more neutral dragons, who were part of the leadership in the faiths and lost a lot of their relatives through the civil war and the greater global conflict. Olid Mardramo was with the opinion that dragons predated the existence of the gods and had no business in the outer planes or worshipping any gods. It also informed me that the Electrum dragons were respected scholars in the celestial courts of Kara-tur, and many of her kin lived there, particularly on the hundreds of isolated islands to the far east. She neglected to warn me that some of these islands were also home to colossal monsters as large as the walking statues of Waterdeep, but then I never asked. Electrum dragons are predominantly solitary creatures whose chosen abodes emphasize isolation and reflection, typically found in remote and imposing locales. These dragons choose habitats that include remote mountain peaks, ancient caverns, and even abandoned architecture that has withstood the test of time. These lairs often double as sanctuaries where the dragon can observe the world in a state of near perpetual reflection, also as if they were statues carved from the living stone on high peaks. Unlike many other draconic beings that are solely driven by hoarded treasure or sheer destructive power, Electrum dragons possess an intrinsic philosophical bent. They often retreat into solitude, not out of malice or inclination towards isolation, but rather to devote themselves to contemplation, study, and debate. Their lairs are not merely repositories for gold and gems. Instead, they are filled with objects of beauty, books, art, and rare information, all carefully collected over centuries. This commitment to wisdom is also seen in their interactions with other beings. When visitors manage to locate these reclusive dragons, they might be greeted not with hostility, but with an invitation to engage in trade, bargaining, or even intellectual discourse. The curious nature of these dragons encourages them to observe nearby creatures, often from great distances. In matters of combat and conflict, they employ the same sort of distant and wise reserve, using minions, spells, and breath weapon attacks before enemies get anywhere near them. But they are formidable in physical combat. They are true dragons after all. Every limb is a weapon they employ, including their wings. They're also well known for devastating flyby attacks, using their rear legs and tail to rip through enemies, unleashing magic and their mind-melting rays of enfeeblement or confusion that serves as their unique gaseous breath weapon options. Magic though, the Electrum dragons are masters of it. They can read it from the moment they hatch and innately detect magic near them. They also have a magical resistance and the ability to enhance their breath weapon to include blinding and deafening effects on top of the enfeeblement or confusion. They are natural artists, and statues that come to life to fight for or otherwise serve them are very common in their lairs. They may be wise philosophers, but if you present them with something that is as deadly as it is beautiful for their lair, they will trade handsomely for it. A wander around their home unsupervised is highly likely to get you horrifically killed, and if there ever was a place for some of Grimtooth's more aesthetically clever and pleasing fiendish traps, this would be it, outside of dwarven strongholds or wizards' towers, of course. Electrum dragons also have distinctive reproductive cycles. They mate infrequently, usually often only once per century, reflecting their long lifespans and slow, deliberate lifestyles. The mating ritual itself is a display of both aerial acrobatics and arcane exchange, the dragons engaging in playful flight formations that are accompanied by the exchange of spells. This ritualistic behavior symbolically ties together their intellectual pursuits with their natural instincts. Approximately 1 year after mating, female Electrum dragons will lay a clutch typically consisting of 1 to 4 eggs. Not many. Their eggs are rubbery and measure about 1 foot or 30 centimeters in length, I am told, and once laid, the eggs hatch in a few days. I'm not exactly sure what elemental energy type they employ during this stage, but the hatchlings have pale grey skin and scales and rather large eyes of bright green. I think they're quite cute, like copper hatchlings, very talkative with a million questions and long periods of sleep and growth. Occasionally they'll cast a spell while sleeping, so give them plenty of room and don't wake them up unless you really have to. As they get older and bigger, their scales gain a polished luster and start to take on a pearl-like sheen. Their eyes remain that bright green but start to become like gems, and eventually like liquid mercury in their full maturity. They do tend to read a lot for dragons. It's not unknown for them to wear reading glasses, not because their eyes are weakened with age, far from it. No, they like owning wondrous items such as lenses of true seeing and the like. But if it makes others think they have a disadvantage, why correct that assumption? I often hear from roleplayers that it's difficult to represent a creature that is certainly a lot more intelligent than a human, given centuries of study and experience. So here's my advice. Don't. Let the game do it for you. You have the power to say, the dragon saw that coming, and it counters it immediately. Annoyed you would try something so obvious. They make a scoffing noise and mimic your voice mockingly, pretending to congratulate themselves, as you, on how clever they are. The dragon has either done all this before, many times, or they've pondered all the different ways it would pan out for centuries. Anytime your players try a tactic that's not completely unexpected, the dragon will be ready for it, waiting for it, crossing it off their bingo list of things stupid humanoids do when raiding your lair or whatever. You don't outwit them, you don't outsmart them. You can confuse them, use their expectations against them, and hope that they underestimate you and make a silly assumption. Dragons hate, absolutely loathe being outwitted, discovered, thwarted, and embarrassed. Very much like cats. Also like cats, the dragon can be too focused on their prey. They may be caught out if they are sure, absolutely certain, that their fleeing prey is in a blind panic and running as instinct dictates. They probably would not expect the victim to lead them right into a serious ambush they had no idea was there. Because who takes a month to silently creep up the side of a mountain with some siege weapons and a squad of hired archers? Not your typical looting scumbag adventurers, that's who. Electrum dragons are also scholars and philosophers. To them, a great debate is as satisfying as combat. Unless they feel very threatened or are protecting some young offspring, they're most likely to at least consider switching from a physical fight to an intellectual one. But don't go into that tactic unprepared. If they grow bored with you, they have already used the conversation as an excuse to get into a good position to bite your head clean off your shoulders. Why? Because they've done this before, maybe dozens of times. Bring them statues, tapestries, musical instruments, gems and jewelry. Make sure the object is both beautiful and rich in provenance, a history, a story, or representative of a culture, a time in history, something now lost that only that object remains of. These are precious to the Electrum dragons, and their lairs are full of such things. Counter to what you might think, many are hounded down among dragons related to or very close friends with each other, and they frequently trade items just as you would expect rare and scholarly antique collectors would, as part of their enjoyment of a piece, the fact that it is desired by others. Electrums fly reasonably well, but as metallics, they have the innate ability to polymorph into other forms. In the case of my friend Oled Mardramo, she preferred to use male humanoid forms to pass through humanoid-dominated lands and had a different persona for Sembia and Termish. I won't reveal their names, but they are known in those lands. Well, some might know they are actually a dragon, but I suspect a lot of scholars I meet are dragons in disguise. You never know. Electrum dragons are very large creatures in their true form though, and being polymorphed for long periods of time is a great strain for them. Just the tiny amount that humanoids eat is a problem for their metabolism, and being so confined with their 3 limbs missing is a very unpleasant sensation to tolerate for very long. As omnivores, they can quietly accumulate a huge heap of food and drink and just relax and eat properly, but they are also predators. They enjoy killing and eating smaller creatures. It's just the way they're wired. They find a confused and stumbling drunk human to be not dangerously erratic, funny, or pathetic. They find them to be delicious. Slurring your words, acting like a fool, and stumbling around to them is likely to make them actually start to drool. They are highly intelligent, but they are not humanoids. They don't see the world the same way. They have a different moral and ethical outlook, and will never see a humanoid as their equal. An adult Electrum dragon will be no less than 36 feet or 11 meters long. Their claws can shred a person just as fast, just as powerfully, and just as deadly as casually as a polar bear. As they grow older and larger, they gain more spells that they can just cast, such as Identify, Locate Object, Dispel Magic, Telekinesis, some powerful illusions, and equally potent healing magic. They are experts on magical texts, but not overly fond of elven magic or druidic magic. Like most dragons, they prefer direct elemental magical spells and rarely study utility spells, considering meta magic and the extending of the power of few core spells that they master over centuries to be far superior. Despite being mostly remote and solitary in their lifestyle, they do enjoy trade, welcoming visitors, and they love to engage in debates and the sharing of ideas. There is a lineage of Electrum dragons who are known to be allies of the elves of Mithranor, a location I know very little about, but I hear there is a powerful mythal that permeates the region, and the dragons seem to operate within it just fine. They're also friends to dwarves, as how could they not admire a culture that produces some of the most gorgeous metal and gemworks of art in the world? The lesser dwarven deity named Dungmarin Brightmantle is known to favour the Electrum dragons, which makes sense for the dwarven god of scholars and free thinkers. You can blame that god's influence for my friend Olidmar Dramo being obsessed with trying to learn how to read minds, for instance. And that's where I shall leave you, while I enjoy a visit from Feather and plan my next winter adventure. My name is AJ Pickett. Thanks for joining me, and as always, I'll be back with more for you very soon.